Are you the host?
Hi. Hey, Ivan. Hi, Yakov.
Hi. So I don't know if you saw, but about 20 minutes ago, I pushed what I had so far in terms of implementation.
Okay, yeah, I haven't seen that. Did you see the changes that I sent to you?
Yeah, yeah. The conversation and those changes was very helpful. I tried to put as much as I could into collect fields, and I think I made significant progress. There's about 6 tests or so that for some reason, not for some reason, aren't working. I know why, because I haven't completely done everything that needs to be done. I'm surprised there isn't more that's not working, but it's coming along.
So it's like just to clarify, the last PR that you did, it's the one that keep everything current behavior, but it do it without branching and with the duplication of execution, right? It's not like Benja's proposal or like Rob's proposal. It's like same as previous PR, but you create alternative version of your previous PR.
Well, actually, I think it pretty much is similar to Rob and Benji's proposal, in the sense that it, Rob showed me a thing or two, and clarified a lot, which got clarified a lot, and I think it's pretty similar, meaning it's going to emit unique, like sort of sub, fragments of the deferred fragments, and with no complex merging, only simple merging by the client. So I think it satisfies the criteria. I'm not sure if it's the exact same algorithm that Benji was thinking of, but from what Rob was showing me, it's pretty similar, except I moved as much as I could into collect fields, I think.
Okay, can you update description because I was confused what I was looking on. Also, what's CF? You use CF as abbreviation before you reference like there. What CF means?
Oh, I'm not even sure I'm using that right. I think it's some, Latin thing. It means basically means like see also or compare to, as opposed to something like that.
Okay. Yeah.
It's like one of those EG or IE things, but I'm not even sure I'm using it right.
Okay.
All right, yeah. So I guess just to update where we're at, we have that proposal from me and Benji that we talked about last week. Since then, there were like a few minor changes that I made. I'm not sure that Matt has seen the proposal, and I would like to get his feedback on it. So maybe I'll quickly go through a few of the examples now, and I'll show what changed, and then yeah, and Yakov and I have both been working on implementation details. But yeah, I think we're making good progress. Yeah, I'm going to post this in the Zoom chat, this link.
Okay, yeah, just a heads up, I'm used in the conference room Zoom for the first time ever, and it's a little confusing, so I'll probably also join, but without my, so that I can actually see the link that you post.
Recording in progress.
Sorry about that.
All right. Yeah, so the basic idea is that we only ever both execute and deliver a field once. So here in this example, everything that's overlapping from the initial payload, that's going to be in the initial data response. We have a pending array that tells you a path. The path will point to where the defer is, and the label, if there is one. The labels don't affect execution anyway. They're just purely informational. And they're optional, so only if they're provided, you'll get it here. And now we have, there could be many objects in incremental for one defer payload, but they will all be delivered. They'll only be delivered once there's enough to satisfy one entire defer. And the incremental has an ID that points to the pending. And this doesn't necessarily mean that this field is completely associated with this ID, because there could be overlap. It could belong to many defers. So the ID that's used is whichever one has the longest path. And then there's a subpath, which is based on whatever the pending path is. It's more levels deep to get into there. Because here, all of the intermediary fields were already sent in the initial payload. Now we're only sending these fields that this is like the intersection of what wasn't overlapping with the initial payload. And so the subpath points down further into the response with the fields that are sent there. If new defers are discovered while it's being executed, you'll get more pendings, and then there's a completed to tell you an ID of which ones are completed. Yeah, here's like a slightly simpler example where all these are duplicated between the defer and not being in the defer. I and J are the only differences. So I is sent in the initial payload, and now we have the defer. It's at the root, so that is the empty array. And now there's two data fields that are sent. This one doesn't have a subpath because this field is at the root. And this one does, that points down into F2, CF with the J response. Yeah,
Sorry,
and then
just a quick, I want to introduce Sabrina, who's my teammate, who is likely to spend more time on the first stream. Like, she does actual defer stream stuff on my team.
Everyone.
So if possible, I'd like her to join these meetings, and probably will actually be here weekly, whereas I mostly can't be. I'm like, sorry.
yeah, great. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Thanks for joining.
Yeah, so
Yeah, if you just send me over your email address, and we can get you on Discord and in the on the calendar invite. Yeah, so this next example is there's two defers here at different levels, and there's some combination of fields overlapping between them. Notably, E and F is inside both of these defers, not inside the initial response. And then we have these two fields, which we're saying we don't know which one's going to complete first. And there's a few more fields on this one. So here's the scenario where this one completes first. So we have in the we have the two pendings that correspond to the two defers. There's now these are sent in separate incremental objects, but they're sent together. As soon as the slower field is completed, now we know we have the data for E and F, we have the data for this, that completes one whole defer. So they're sent together. And that corresponding ID is marked as completed. And when this other field is ready, that's sent here. And the logic that we're using to know how to split them up is like whatever fields are completely overlap in defers can be sent together. So because G, H, and potentially slow field B are not in any other defers, this can be sent in one incremental. E and F is always going to be sent in its own because it overlaps here. And this is always going to be sent in its own. And so then you could see in the same example where they complete where this one completes later, we have all of the same incremental objects, they're just sent in a different order. Now here, like this one is sent in the first payload along with ENF, that's mark completed. And when slow field A is ready, then that's sent, and this other one is mark completed. And yeah, one case where it might get a little confusing is there's two defers here. List and item both overlap, ID and value are different. And so we'll send one payload that has list and item in it, and other objects that have the ID and value. And depending on which one is ready first, that's when one of these will be mark complete. But as we're traversing down, once we like list is they're both overlap. So that's executed together. Item, same thing is executed together. But when we get to ID and value, now we know that like when ID is being executed, it doesn't match what was in the parent. So it has to break off into its own object.
This makes some sense. One question, I'm sure you've already litigated this, is why use the subpath instead of like just resending the path as a set of objects?
I think it was just to why send the subpath instead of sending the objects inside of data again? Is that the question?
So, right, because at least in this case, like I guess if you're in one element inside of a list, you have to figure out how to have that specific list element. But like in this case, it would be less payload, it'd be a lot less data sent if it was just data list items, and then the list of 1, 2, 3 or whatever.
Yeah, I think that's what.
So
Go ahead.
So
is
one of
this-
the constraints,
Oh, go on. Yeah, sorry.
so one of the constraints that we were talking about was that whether each item requires a simple merge rather than a deep merge. So in order to do that, you end up with a lot of repetition. I suggested on the Discord chat one way to avoid that, but this is, I guess, the naive approach, which works.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, the trade-off was specifically like not having clients do having to do deep merges. Yeah, if there's no fields in your defer, it's just going to be ignored completely. Like this example. And we're not doing, we had talked about merging defers with either the same label or at the same path. We're not doing any of that anymore because there isn't the opportunity for the response to be amplified like it was with the previous iteration. So we have the labels, and it's only the fields that are inside the same defer are grouped together and will be held up for each other. This one I feel like might be the most I don't know, the thing that might be most surprising to people. And it's with null bubbling. So what happens if you send a field and now another field that's being executed later should bubble to null out that field? So what we're saying is going to happen. So here's the example. We're saying that Baz resolves before Quux. But Quux is non-nullable and it returns null. So if there were no defers here, you should get back foo with another field, but bar would be null because this one nulled out and bubbled up. But here, Baz, we're saying Baz finishes first. So we're sending this payload that has foo, bar, and Baz in it. But now we can't go back, and we don't want to go back and null this out. So we're going to basically say that this whole fragment can't be delivered because we don't want to overwrite a field that was sent previously. So you'll get just the ID and the data being null and the errors and that it was completed. So that basically means that this another field is getting lost now. It's not equivalent to there not being defers there. But I think that that's the best alternative that we've come up with.
And I assume you guys have already thought through the treating it the same as a normal payload where you just in this payload bar is null, but another field is there and there's an errors array.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't want this payload is, I mean, this response is based on not sending the objects twice. So bar is already sent. And so we could send it again and I guess leave it up to the clients if they want to ignore it on their end or take data that was already rendered and remove it. But that taking data and removing it sounds bad. So I think we're doing the work that we're expecting that clients would do anyway.
That's certainly the most backward or most future compatible way of doing it is just say, okay, for now it's an error, so no client has to handle it, and if we want to figure out how to handle it, we could in the future. But yeah. I
mean, maybe in a client could opt into if client control nullability becomes a thing, that's one way to get around it. Yeah, in this example, we have there's two fields on each of these and they all overlap by one field. So in this one, we say Baz takes the longest. And this is just kind of demonstrating how foo and bar are sent with ID 0, but they really belong to both of the other IDs. And that's why we could make IDs an array and have multiple IDs there, but then it gets confusing when you have the subpath. And then, so the rule is just going to be that whichever one is the longest, that's what we're going to use for the IDs to minimize what goes in the subpath. But really it's the pending and completed, that's the metadata to tell you what's being executed and what's done. And the ID inside incremental is really just a shortcut to avoid repeating the longer paths. Yeah, so it seemed like most people that we talked to so far are on board with this. I would love to hear if Matt or anyone from Facebook has concerns about it. Because I know that it's pretty different from what you guys have implemented.
Yeah, the trade-off to me seems like we get client mutable, we get local component mutable state at the expense of a lot of network redundancy, right? Whereas if and you get that state updating basically as quickly as could be done, right? You basically never block for anything that you might end up accidentally blocking on. I do wonder, given in the P90 or in the most common cases whether the duplication of IDs and paths and whatnot, this might just, maybe I need to, maybe somebody needs to, somebody, I don't know, needs to like do the payload size analysis, but there's basically, I don't know if if we're approaching the same response size as just having duplicate, like full duplicated response objects for, so we know that foo will only be executed once. And then on the server, you basically have to have a like execution, like, yes, this was already resolved, we're not resolving it again map. But if we have like, if we can shrink the size of the incremental payloads to just be basically the singular path from root or path from wherever, even just ID, I don't know, and not have the subpath and not end up ever having like ID one multiple times. Basically, when you get an ID, it means it is completed. Or at least that like portion up until the next defer is completed. But I don't know, like, that would be my, because this is certainly, the other thing is I'm not confident that, like, I'm in the middle of trying to figure out a very simple open source compatible client, and I'm not sure that like how I would actually represent this on the client is merging versus read throughs. So like when I hit the me field, now I go look at some, basically these pending payloads and just read them as they come. In which case having fewer of the pending payloads sent would be, or like having a clearer pointer to those pending payload. It's, yeah. All that is to say is like so right now, if I'm the client, what I have to do is look up. So as I'm walking the tree, I hit some deferred field, and I have to be walking my my pendings, my pending fields as well, right? So I'm on me. I'm not sure how I would on the client walk the pending array to know what I'm missing, versus I'd be tempted, like the data might all need to be there, but I'd be tempted to turn the pending array into a tree itself. But I don't know. I don't know if that's a good idea.
Do you
but
mean
this
like
is-
having metadata inside of the response shape?
No, like basically when I'm on the me field, I know like, okay, I know I expect there, like I know that there is both, that there's a defer at the query root level, and I know that there's a defer under me, right? My client should know that because there is that add defer or whatever. But like I basically need to have a pointer in that defer at that point of what the path is. And the way that the pending payloads work right now, I have to go through every single pending payload in order to find the one that corresponds to the ID that I'm at right now. Whereas, like, if I know that I'm, like, if there's a pending tree or something, instead of like a list of pending payloads, I would be able to basically be walking at the same time, both the pending tree and the data, or like from the path. It basically turns the lookup cost into a log n instead of linear.
Mhm.
But I'm not confident that that's even like, I'm not confident that that's a deal breaker or even a real problem, because if on average we're gonna have less than 100 pending payloads, it like doesn't matter. Like linear search through an array versus walking a B tree is like, it's gonna be the same cost if it's less than 100 items. So I don't know. This is like premature optimization me. Sorry.
Getting over 100 items would probably mean like
Yeah,
defers
probably
inside
not.
of very long lists, or
Especially because I would expect if you you might have 100 defers if you have like a long list or something, but they're going to be probably nested and nested within each other. So, right, I would be surprised. Also, if you have that, you probably should be using stream instead. Yeah. So, yeah, this is just like very raw, my initial take, and like, I know I'm throwing out new context, but that's because I've like gained some new context from actually trying to do an open source based, like open source response based client. Yeah, sorry, that's probably not actually super helpful.
no, it's interesting to think about. If you like think of like a way to represent it, definitely let me know and we can consider it.
But yeah, right, the question then becomes like, part of the point of having fewer, like allowing us to merge the data, or having like fewer, deduplicating the data, is that one, you can use it quicker, and two, you can your overall response size goes down. And I'm not yet convinced that the first is definitely true with this, which is good. I'm not confident the second is true in like the normal case. But I'm also not confident that that matters too much. Like,
Yeah, I don't know. I
what-
think especially the concern about duplication in the response size is the case of like public GraphQL servers where the client may be acting maliciously.
Yeah.
And it definitely is easy to, if for every defer you're getting all of the data, then it's definitely easy to yeah, get like a very large response.
Yeah, but it's also like, if you compare this to say HTML encoding, like the actual like size of the text doesn't matter. Like it's not comparable, so it's like, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. The way that this
So-
algorithm works now, it's basically each one of these objects that it creates their own execution pretty much. So it's like doing execute fields for this group of objects, for this group, for this group. Yakov's solution that like reassembled it. It had like another step that after doing that would reassemble them back into the shape that matches the defer more closely. And so it's doable. But I think that it like adds more work for the server to do once you already have done like the the execution deduplication the way that we're doing it, which is like by not duplicating at all.
Yeah.
But we could, so basically I was looking at how some of the results in the incremental array also might be better represented as a tree. And I posted in the chat a suggestion that you know, we could sort of mark the divider between the subpath and the data with kind of a special character. I thought initially we could just use a double underscore, but Benji pointed out that's actually valid for an alias, so that actually might show up in the path. But if we allowed like another special character, like the plus sign, you know, we could basically have a marker between where in the incremental array where we could sort of condense some of those. And that same basic approach of using a special character, if I understand correctly, might help some of what you're talking about, Matt, in terms of the pending array. Meaning we could have a list of potentially of sort of merged paths, and sort of have a marker to identify, you know, to then you know, sort of identify where the ID would be. I'll try to later write up a mock of that if it actually works out.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, it's just that I feel like putting metadata inside of data, even if it's only in the new incremental payloads, could be very controversial. And like, I'm not saying that's not the reason to do it. But I feel like we need like a really solid reason for doing so that there isn't like objection to it, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's also true that this is basically just you know, it's basically just a different serialization of the same information, so to speak, to condense data, make things a little bit easier. And so it, you know, you know, if some server and client pair want to do that, it's actually wouldn't really be in compliant with the spec. I think, but you know, we don't have to have that within the main spec. Like, it's an option out there for people to pursue outside of the spec.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, anyway, for as far as next steps, I think that I want to present this at the next working group, which I think is in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Um,
If you, I assume this link is in the Discord, Rob?
Yeah,
Okay.
I'll post it again too, so it's at the.
Okay. Perfect. Do this one, and I'll make sure to get Sabrina's email and Discord to you.
Rob, at the last
Yes.
meeting, I had to drop. Did you come, or did the group come to a conclusion about whether the spec text and/or the implementation should allow early execution or early initiation of execution of deferred payloads? I mean the delivery is definitely deferred, but was it just, you know, decided one way or the other about allowing the execution to begin earlier?
Yeah, so Benji brought up his thoughts were that we shouldn't even begin to start executing any deferred fields until all of the non-deferred fields or fields from a higher up defer are completed. And that does simplify the spec. And he mentioned like if you have a queue of database connect queries, and there's the possibility that your deferred data could be slowing down your non-deferred data. But I think that I also brought up, but I think it could also be dangerous to drastically extend the amount of time that it takes a request to complete. So
Yeah,
I don't think there was like a complete agreement.
I definitely do not think we should, like, this I have a strong opinion on, which is that you should not it may be the case that you should require like the deferred payloads coming separately, but specifying the order that the server runs the resolvers, I think is not a great path, because servers like essentially the defer is its own resolver. It's like a new kind of resolver. And like we kind of explicitly say, yeah, you can figure out your resolvers your own way. For some servers that have like multi-threaded servers with potentially like a single database connection or whatever, like the cost of like a lot of these fields might not even be hitting a database, in which case you want to just be able to spawn 100 threads for your 100 defers and just like do the resolution. But
Yeah.
if you wanted your server to explicitly block and wait, you should be allowed to do that.
Yeah, so I think the discussion was, does the spec say that it doesn't start executing until later, but make a note that you could do it earlier? Or do you write the spec as if it's executing right away, but say that you could delay it? And so the spec text is simpler if you wait. So my argument was that we should do it the other way, where it executes right away. So this way we can also have the logic that says that if a sibling field nulls up, that if a sibling in the initial payload nulls up and that wipes out where your defer is, but you actually already started executing it, we could write the function that says to make sure that that gets canceled, instead of like just saying you can do it earlier, but it's not really documented like what other steps you have to take to make sure that you don't send invalid stuff.
I see. I don't know
So,
if
Rob-
that is.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I don't know if that's super important one way or the other, but like rather the canceling mechanism, like it feels fine to allow a server to not cancel while it's executing in separate containers or whatever.
Yeah, that was an issue that we had talked about sometime last year, I think.
Yeah.
And we said we didn't want the server to send a payload that has a path that doesn't exist in the tree, which would happen if a sibling null bubbles up. So,
but we can have that even in the case where we allow multi-threaded execution or whatever, because you could like if one of the sibling fields is just taking a really, really long time, you could end up like sending it being like, hey, I'm pretty sure this is going to complete and this is not going to be a problem, and then it is.
yeah, it was when I say sibling, I don't mean a sibling defer. I guess I mean a sibling field that's outside of the defer. So I guess a sibling field in the initial payload.
So you have a sibling field in the initial payload, you have Oh, so you're saying we should. And
Maybe
then
I could
the
write a quick example.
defers. And then the defers sibling field fails. Yeah.
Yeah, so let's say that D, that like you start executing B, this is deferred, this also starts getting executed. If D is null, bubbles up, wipes out B, now your path here is pointing to something that doesn't exist anymore.
Okay,
If
yeah,
you
so
were
that-
doing the case, yeah, like if you were doing the case where you waited for all this stuff to execute before this even started, it wouldn't be a problem. But if you're
Right.
doing it earlier,
Right.
you have to understand that if this nulls out, you should not send this to the client because
Okay, yeah, that makes total sense. I agree with you. 100%.
Yeah, so I think the spec should like say that it's start now, but you can delay it, and then we should have that logic in the spec so that yeah, I think most people agree on that, but maybe if Benji wants, we can discuss it at another working group later on. But I'm going to go forward with that assumption. Yeah, so is there anything else we want to discuss in this meeting? As far as the implementation, I did some rough changes to Yakov's previous implementation that gets us, I think, pretty close to what's here. And I think Yakov has been working on a more optimal version of that. I'm not sure that if we should spend the time to merge the changes that give you the, if we're leaning in this direction, I don't know if it makes sense to merge the changes that give us what we have on main now. That's not this, but without the execution deduplication, because I think there's a lot that would be like adding a lot of code that ultimately isn't necessary. I don't know, what do you guys think?
So if you compare like pairs, they like second pairs that implement like proposal behavior. It remove stuff, change stuff, or add stuff. So it's like mostly removal, mostly addition, or mostly change of a stuff from Yakov PR that doesn't change like observed behavior, but change like internal thing.
Yeah, I think so. We have on main now, we have everything is duplicated, right? We have Yakov's PR, which is response is duplicated, execution is not deduplicated. And we have hypothetical PR that completely implements this. I think that this one is a smaller change than the one that does only the execution deduplication, but keeps the response duplication.
Okay, yeah, in that case, it makes sense to give it a shot on next working group, main working group. If everybody agree, kind of, we get like a fast path. If not, we still have Yakov PR, and I think like I propose a solution like that. On if on next working group, like we see this proposal the way forward, it makes sense to like polish it or merge it right away. If not, I think we need to update what we have on main to have like iterational process for people to see and have like a baseline, move baseline a little bit.
Yeah, makes sense. The difference is that between this and keeping and is I think both PRs do roughly the same, both approaches do roughly the same amount of work in how they execute things. The step that maintains the output that we have now has to do another step of assembling these incremental objects that were executed separately back into the shape that matches what we have. So that's like the extra code that wouldn't be fully necessary if we went straight to this proposal.
Yeah, I mean, Rob, from my end, from my point of view, because we're making, I think, such rapid progress, hopefully, right? You know, it may not pay to merge it. Like if it was taking us a long time, then yeah, then it would be nice to have something like as a reference. But seeing as we're hopefully making such rapid progress, you know, no, I would agree with you that we can just hold off.
Okay. In what case we have like a game plan. So like you do, Rob, you do joint presentation with Benchy like last time or like, so we should like next working group we will have a slot for this topic, right?
Yeah, I want to add to the agenda for the next working group, and I'll probably go over most of these examples again.
Yeah, I think like one thing we want to prevent is like situation where Lee or like working group without attendees. So if we had it last minute or like in a day or two, people, like some people wouldn't show up, and it will create weird situation where technically we discuss it, but practically it's the same people as we have here, and there is no like wide discussion. Submitting right now, it will give it's put like it make it more serious, and people put it in the calendar that they need to show up to discuss. Also having like some you created good document, having it upfront will have it will give people a chance to you can add maybe is that it's not the like final draft of what will be presented there. I expect like some evolution happening in like week or two, but at least people will have like baseline and confirm their opinion.
Yeah, so I'll put it on the agenda today. I'll say that like we want to discuss. I'll put right in the agenda like we want, like we've like been iterating on this duplication issue, and we want to this new direction that we're mostly agreed on. We want to get feedback, and I'll put this document in there too, and I'll get that all up today. So hopefully,
and I'll try to either comment or like if I don't comment this week, it should be like I don't have any, or we don't have any like clear problems per se, unless somebody in the working group brings up something we didn't think about, which can always happen.
yeah, awesome. All right, so that's all I have for now. Yeah, and we do have another meeting next Monday, which is before that working group, so we can iterate more if we need to. But so yeah, hopefully I'll see you all then.
Sounds great.
Thank you.
Bye.